I want to invite Andy Doyle to the stage to chair the next session, which is really about the future of the tillage industry, and I might also invite up the panellists as well, or maybe I'll leave that job to you, Andy. Come on ahead.
Okay, thanks very much, Michael, and everybody that's here is welcome. Matt, I think you're up here as well to make up my four-man team. And welcome to everybody that's online listening to us also. The next session is about the future of tillage. It's probably more precisely looking at where the whole food vision effort that the Minister is attempting to put in place to try and increase the area of tillage is the objective, but I think all of us are aware that the biggest single challenge we have is to slow or prevent or stop the current decline that's happening. And you know, if there's one thing that hits me in particular just sitting in the industry, it's the fact that so many decisions seem to be made in isolation, and they tend to be counterproductive against some other one that's already there. So look, at my four panelists are people that are involved directly in the food vision conversation. Firstly, I have Matt Dempsey. Matt is well known in the industry for lots of different reasons, and I'm not going to go into them because we're here to talk rather than get big introductions. But as well as being president of Tillage Industry Ireland, Matt is chair of the Food Vision and has the unenviable task of trying to pull together the myriad of different topics and ideas that come there and try to channel them into a direction that will be good for the industry going forward. Next, I have Max Potterton, who is Secretary of IFA. And again, you know, IFA and Bobby Miller sitting currently at the end from the Irish Grain Growers Group. Bobby is also on the Food Vision Group, and we have, I think Michael Moroney wants to come, but I'm getting a couple of others instead. I'm going to have to ask Patrick, I did meet you before, yes. Patrick from the contractors, FCI, again, because they're part of it. We all know what's happening, in particular the smaller businesses around the country, the difficulty of affording machinery and the increasing importance that's there for the contracting, or the importance of the contracting service and the great challenges that they are also meeting, particularly in terms of accessing labour. And this man is from IFAC, but you'll have to give me your name. Marty Murphy. I'm sorry, Marty, I wasn't given the list of names at the beginning. And at the far end, I have John Spink, who is also here. So we have a big range of people who are directly involved in all kinds of different aspects of the industry. And what I'm going to do initially is to ask everybody just to give 2 minutes of basically the kind of the things that you're seeing that are critical to the relevance of the industry going forward. And Marty, because you're nearest to me now, I'm going to throw the ball in first. But unquestionably, the big issue that you have is the one that John Mahan emphasised with the blue circle, which is the financial sustainability of the grower in the sector. If grain prices were double what they are today, sorry, Michael. If grain prices were where they were today, as in where they were last year, we probably wouldn't be asking as much about the sustainability one. We could carry a somewhat lower yield if the price was higher. But that's not the way it goes. But Marty, you're off the hook for 1 second, because I think one of the things that we really want to do for people in the audience is different for those of us that live in the middle of it, is to ask the chair of the Food Vision Group, Matt Dempsey, just to give a quick overview on the progress to date and the fact that we just have an interim report presented. And Matt, you might just give us the nuts and bolts so that the others can comment.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for the opportunity to come up to speed with this. As you know, as Andy has said, the Minister for Agriculture has set up the Food Vision Tillage Group. And it's probably the first time that tillage has really featured strongly in government discussions. And to that, I'd like to pay tribute to those that set up Tillage Industry Ireland. But broadly, I mean, the basic aim is to simply increase the tillage acreage to about 400,000 hectares which is a significant enough increase of 60 to 70,000 hectares from where we are at the moment. Why should anyone care? We import about 70% of our animal feed anyway, so why not let the market rule? And this is really strongly felt within some parts of the sector, understandably, if you're in the grain importing business especially. But I think there are a few factors that are really now bearing down on government. The first is broadly the need for the recognition of the need for a balanced Irish agriculture. And then the commissioning by Tillage Industry Ireland by Professor Michael Wallace of UCD, I think brought a new level of realisation at government and other levels as to where the sector was actually economically contributing and how it should be sensibly discussed. Then, and all of this is almost by drip feed, there was a realisation that in the Irish tillage sector, we have an intrinsically internationally competitive sector with some of the highest cereal yields in the world, obtained on a fairly consistent basis, but with modern plant protection products. And that itself is throwing up its own challenges, as we heard earlier on today. But then there was also, from a government point of view, I think they were looking at a branch of the economy that is also growing insofar as its contribution to the added value sector of the economy, especially as regards to drinks, but also as regards some specialist foodstuffs, such as the gluten-free oats development. And obviously there's a nod towards regional economic development. So all of this was coming in. But I honestly think now that we're at a different phase in the development of domestic supports for the Irish tillage sector. And yesterday's official announcement of a drop in the nitrates derogation for dairy farmers is, in my view, a signal that now is the time for the tillage sector to actually articulate what it can expect and would like to see from government. There are two pressures, in my view, bearing down to give us this unique opportunity. There's, as we've already heard, much lower greenhouse gas emissions from the tillage sector, so there is actually an incentive nationally to try and increase the tillage area because of its low contribution to greenhouse gases. And there is also, and I think this is going to assume a significantly greater importance, there is a recognition that a lot of tillage land can do with the organic matter and the nitrates from a lot of the nitrate derogation land. Now, this is easier said than done. It's been talked about before, but never, I think, have we remotely seen the government interest in such a scheme and the visible need from a national viewpoint for such a scheme. So we have produced, and here I'd have to pay tribute to the backup that we're receiving from the Department of Agriculture and what could be loosely called the secretarial team there. There's an enormous amount of backup, very competent minutes, very competent capture of the discussion points. So we have produced an interim report and it'll be available online within a few days, together with a few comments. But there's a lot of action points there, but ultimately there's about 30 of us around the table representing all kinds of groups and attitudes to the Irish tillage sector from all kinds of angles. There has been a really refreshing absence of grandstanding. So everyone has contributed in a really positive, sensible way. And so where have we got to? So broadly, at the first, we list the strengths. So there's low greenhouse gas emissions, high yield potential, competent growers and support services industry, very good labour efficient per unit of output, and an increasing level of value-added markets. But there are problems, and the problems, of course, are very clear, and you can see that in the relative decline of the mainstream cereals, which has to some extent been masked by the increase in beans and oilseed rape over the last few years. But in the main, we're relatively small-scale operators compared with international competitors, and there is a dependence on contractors. So I have no doubt that both of those will have to feature in the final report. And while the interim report, in my view, is a reflection of the discussions and the arguments and the proposals that have been made so far. Ultimately, as a group, we're going to have to take responsibility for real, concrete, perhaps costly policy proposals to government. So I'm certainly prepared. We have to pin our colours to the mast, saying this is what the industry needs if it is to meet not just your own targets as regards increasing the tillage area, but meeting the national targets as regards water quality and greenhouse gas emissions. Both of those two items are new to the party, and they're going to have to come in to the final reckoning. As well as that, of course, we have very narrow weather windows. I don't think that was ever as clear-cut as this year, given the weather that we've had. We've dependence on high-input systems to achieve yield. There's a lack of infrastructure and policy, and we're going to be advising on policy. At the end of the day, we have to efficiently transport, store, and apply slurry to tillage farms, but especially to growing crops. In my view, we are in danger of missing a major communications point. We should be saying to dairy farmers very publicly, don't you realise that thousands of litres of slurry exported from your farms is in fact getting rid of the need to lease extra land or to reduce your cow numbers. The choices are that clear. They can export the slurry and reduce the need for leasing or sacrificing cow numbers. That message, in my view, has not got through at all. And we have a duty, especially in this week's announcements and the toing and froing at farm organisational and ministerial level, to get that across. This can be our contribution. All of these and some additional areas have featured in the discussions. So we can expect solid recommendations that, in my view, all 30 of us will have to stand behind and present to government as regards what's needed. There have been some experiments with the tillage incentive scheme, really well-intentioned, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But it's very clear that there's major changes needed. The suitability of the Acres Initiative for tillage is probably doubtful, but really good innovations have been introduced, such as straw incorporation and the protein aid. And we're going to have to look and come up with a view as regards taxation measures. If a guy leases acres for tillage, is he entitled to anything extra over and above the normal leasing concessions? Do we run into state aid problems with Brussels or with Dublin or with reluctant ministers for finance? These are issues we're going to have to face into, whether we like it or not. We're going to have to face into the fact, in my view, for agricultural contractors, should they qualify for TAMs regardless of whether or not they're significant farmers in their own right? The service they provide in an Irish context is probably much greater proportionately than in practice, certainly than in any other tillage enterprise I have visited elsewhere in the world. As well as that, is there any scope, and we've run into problems on this, on the whole quality assurance criteria. Board BIA will get behind native pork or beef or dairy products fed with imported GM material from all over the world. Is there any scope for an Irish identification process that would give us some credit for that? And the only credit that's worthwhile, let's be frank, is extra cash in our pockets. We've incredibly undeveloped views and policies on aerobic digestion. There's something like 90 anaerobic digestion plants in Northern Ireland. There's a vague smattering of an introduction of the policy here. This is going to have to be dramatically enlarged and put forward as a sensible way of dealing with the potential of it. The possibilities of an oilseed rape processing industry and the resurgence of even a limited native milling wheat industry. To say all of this represents quite an agenda for us to examine sensibly, but more to the point, to come up with coherent policies that we can stand behind and expect government to implement. We have a duty to give it our best shot. The time has probably never been more favourable, given the budgetary situation, apart from anything else, of the state and national exchequer, coupled with the visible needs on the climate and water quality fronts. It's never been more favourable, I welcome the foundation of the group. It's great to have an inside seat in the development of what may well be innovative, effective, profitable policies for the sector. So we're halfway there as regards the interim report, but the real judgment will be what kind of report do we produce and stand behind in the future. Thanks very much. Okay.
Thanks, Matt. That gives everybody a kind of a good feel for what's been going on and what's in there. I think it's about 22 different action points that have been identified in the interim report, and Matt has touched vaguely on virtually all of them in the presentation. So in a sense, that's given the rest of our panellists the background, and they've seen the same interim report. At least most of them have. Marty, I'm not sure about you. But it's given them the background, in a sense, to begin to formulate ideas. And what I want now is just to ask each person here what they believe are the most important things that they want to see changed in order to enable that growth in tillage. Firstly, to stop the rot, if I can use that phrase, and then also to see, to produce an environment where the tillage area can begin to increase over time. So, Marty, with a delayed response from you, it's back to you now.
Yes, thanks everyone. So effectively, Matt touched on there the leased land exemption. We all know this is vitally important. We do know it's under review by government at the moment in time. We do know it just applies to farmers in general. There's no specification on any particular type of farmer. And obviously that's going to be vastly important, especially with that cut in the nitrates for inland. Like, it's going to be hugely important from that perspective, and to be pushing it on even further that it gets renewed. The next one that pops up is, obviously we're in a very kind of capital heavy industry. We're going to have a lot of machinery and all that type of good stuff. There's been huge work done on transitions into companies, and to ease that process up a little bit. We all know at the moment is effectively we can only really change from one or number as the entitlements once in a year, and doing it twice can cause issues and things like that. So when we're transferring into companies, that can be taking a bit of a longer time. It would be nicer if that was able to do it there, because at the end of the day, companies are designed to be capital intensive because they reduce the cost of capital. So it's hugely important. And then the final part that I've been commenting on is around leases and things like that. But the moment of finance lease and how it's treated when we're going from machinery into a finance lease, it can be a bit of a hiccup from a tax perspective there, where effectively we're losing out on tax. Now, in the long run, we're getting it, but there's a bit of a delay where effectively upfront we're paying a little bit more tax than we would normally be doing. So it would be advantageous if finance leases were treated more like just normal capital allowances, a standard tractor that you're buying down the field, and nothing kind of unusual happening with it.
Okay, thanks, Marty. Max, from a farmer's perspective.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, just firstly to say we really welcome the foundation of the tillage group and then the publication of the interim report. It's been a great opportunity, and it's great to see that government finally recognises the absolute essential need for a structured and coherent plan to drive the sector forward. I suppose in terms of the immediate actions we'd like to see, you can divide them into short and longer term. Short term, I definitely think greater cooperation with the livestock sector is essential in stopping any further decline in the area. We have to get better at using livestock manures on tillage lands, and to do that, I think we need policy instruments. We need to get storage onto tillage farms so that it can be spread at appropriate times. There's great opportunities, and we can see in the signpost program with Darren's earlier, there's great opportunities to use it at various points in the crop growing cycle. So I think it's essential that, and especially in light of the reduction in from 250 to 220 this week, I think that's going to become even more important. At a more medium or longer term, I really think, while there's been huge progress in our premium grains, our feed grain market is still by far the biggest. And the vast majority of tillage farmers are involved in that. So I think we need a suite of measures really to drive that forward, be it the marketing of our grains, price risk management, and the value that's put on them from an environmental perspective, for our meat and dairy products and our pork and poultry as well. I really think that's so important. I think even very basic things like the amount of grain we have in store domestically, we don't have good information on that relative to other countries. for our feed grains. And we need to, I think we need to regain traction and say we're still very much producing excellent quality feed grain here. And while we'll always have a need for import, it's just the very nature of the situation. But I think in the next 5 years to 6 years, I'd love to see progress on that. Those are the views of the Grain Committee, who I'm secretary for as well, and IFA. So,
okay, thanks, Max. Patrick, from a contractor, Matt mentioned that the contractors are going to become increasingly important because of the increasing cost and sophistication of machinery. So, can the contractors cope with current acreage or an increasing acreage?
Thanks, Andy. We'd like to thank Matt very much for mentioning the interim report. One of the first times contractors have really been brought to the front of the kind of lead team that needs to be in place. Sorry, to promote tillage. But from our point of view, we have a couple of major issues. We need access to specialist equipment. So all other industries get their access to their less spreading equipment or their specialist fertilizer equipment. It goes on and on. The list is available. As proper contractors, I have no herd number. So I have no access to TAMs, and neither does most of our members. So we need something in place to maybe rapidly advance that so as we can bring forth what we can give to the tillage industry. But another major issue we have is labour. So we don't have a skilled labour force, and we have no apprenticeship for tractor drivers or equipment operators. And from class statistics, less than 20% of the technology in the machines they produce is actually utilised. That's frightening. And we need to train operators to be able to produce the quality of work that is required, push forward for our low carbon footprint, bring down the carbon navigator. We need everything in place. And the better skilled operator, the better everything can be. And finally, there's something that's been reiterated time and time again today. We need organic fertilizers on tillage farms. To provide that, we need storage. We need winter work. So we need to be able to hold the fertilizer, be it manure, digestate, whatever, in the off season. And with the very tight weather windows, we have to have the capability of doing it rapidly onto the growing crop to get best use for the tillage farmer. So that's our 3 suggestions going forward.
Thanks, Patrick. And just before I go to Bobby, I know there's a lot of people in the audience that are involved either full-time or part-time in tillage production. And many people in the audience growing crops use a contractor for something on the farm. That's a lot of hands. And I think that's kind of raring. Bobby's hand is up as well. So, they're an important part of the industry. And Patrick, I think you're right. It's good that they are being recognised as an element of the future for tillage. Bobby, you're representing farmers as well from the Irish Grain Growers Group.
Yeah, first point I'd like to make, as we're after going through a very difficult year, and I'd really like to acknowledge that. Firstly, has been a Trojan year in tillage farmers, well, in all farmers, but the weather events. So I just want to recognise that we're fully aware of that. We're all fully aware of that. We're going to be fully aware of it when we start getting our grain checks. But the second point I think I will say is the report that came yesterday, and I have to highly compliment those that drafted it and put together. It is very reflective of group meetings so far. And congratulate those that put together. One key focus that we need to have is adding value to the grain that we grow and the crops that we grow. The bottom line is the main thing that matters to tillage farmers. You can talk about schemes, importing slurry, they're only secondary, and we need to focus on adding value to our grains. And that leads into promotion of our grains and our pulses. That has been very poorly done by tillage farmers, by the tillage sector in general. We have to look on in admiration at the dairy sector in that regard. If you have a product to sell, you have to be able to promote as well. And that's another key area that rather than going over points that's been mentioned already, we do need to promote what we have, from the grains that we produce, the soil that we're using, and aspects like that, how we are contributing strongly to sustainability. We have to get that message out there if we want to increase the tillage area. You have to create demand for what you have. It won't happen otherwise. There's no point having a product if you can't sell it, and that's as simple as that. Look, the work ongoing has been very interesting, very excellent presentations being brought forward for the group to consider as well. I'll have to mention that as well. Interim report is interesting enough. Yeah, we got a good read of it there last night. Looking forward to the rest of the work that we're going to do as well. As we all know, the tillage industry is a very complex industry, and there's obviously no silver bullet. But so we need more gears to engage and more engine horsepower to make everything move. I do know a concern. We have had reports before. We have had, even just last year, Andy, in the middle of the harvest, there was a report sent to the Minister for Agriculture, and not one extra thing was done in that report for the budget. So I'm putting out the warning there now. There needs to be action on what we do as well. There's no point having a lovely report done at the end of it, an excellent report put together, if the government and the industry and the farmers don't all react to it. Otherwise, we're all wasting our time at this as well. I will strongly state that as well.
Okay, thanks, Bobby. John, from a restart point of view, from a policy point of view, well, research in particular, what do you see as the things that are in greatest need of being addressed in the short and then in the longer term?
Okay, Andy. Oops. I guess that's one of the dangers to be at the end of this. There's not much left to say now, is there? Now, look, in the short term, Andy, and the year that we've just had, it's undoubtedly going to be policies and issues to do with tax and support. Direct support for the sector is going to be needed. Okay, but politicians change regularly, and I think for the longer term viability of the sector, it needs to be inherently profitable. The market needs to be returning a profit, on what you produce, not relying on the tax man or whatever. So, Bobby kind of stole my thunder a bit. But I think developing higher value markets, developing where products are developed, and an inherent selling point of that product is that it's made from Irish grain or Irish pulses. Yeah, then we're not exposed to the world market, which obviously is hugely variable. We know that between last harvest and this harvest. The person producing the product has to buy their grain off an Irish grower. Yeah, irrespective of what the world price is. So I think developing, products, whether they be going into the drink industry, where they have to have an Irish ingredients in them, whether that be developing food ingredients, the processing, say, of beans and producing plant proteins and products, that have on the label, this is made from Irish beans. Again, they can't go and buy them in France if they're cheaper. Another examples, might be, and I think Matt mentioned this, the processing of oilseed rape. If we could get support for the export of that, and we could export Irish rapeseed and develop that as a market, it has to be Irish rape that goes, Irish rapeseed that goes into it. And I think longer term, looking at some of those things to make the sector inherently profitable and insulate us from the volatility of world markets. And we've got to remember, and whatever we could, if we can add value to Irish grain going into the feed industry, great. But we've got to remember that's really the bottom of the market. Feed is the bottom of the market, and a lot of what goes into animal feeds is byproducts. So why don't we do the same? Why don't we get some of our products, take something out of them that's high value? We'll give the feed industry what's left at the end, and they can use it. But take as much value out of it as we can beforehand.
And I think it's fair and important to say, and maybe people won't be aware of it, that currently in Teagasc there's a huge amount of research going on trying to take high-value products, components, out of the protein crops that we're growing. Okay, it's only research, it's not a real market yet. But that is something that in theory would take crops like beans or other, well, specifically beans, because that's what they're working on, and elevate it in terms of value for a system. You know, am I right in thinking, John, it's something like 60% of the research effort in Moore Park is now using plant proteins?
Am I allowed to say I'm delighted to say a lot of the milk research facilities in Moore Park are working on proteins? I think nearly all of the new projects they've started in the last couple of years, or significant new projects that have been in terms of Moore Park food, have been to do with plant proteins. Now it's you and Mullins, wherever he's hiding in the room, is kind of leading a lot of that. But, and you say it's research, Andy, but I think that research has shown that it can be done. So, you know, it's got that far. You know, we can do it. We can fractionate beans and develop various products. It's now a case of getting that scaled up and getting an industry going.
And it's also worth mentioning that a chunk of that work is now also being done by the big dairy co-ops. So plants are, in a sense, they're coming into their own to some degree. And the challenge that we have is to begin to prepare an industry to take advantage of that. Now, before I go back and ask any questions, this part of the day is very much for the audience. This is where you have an opportunity to say some of the things that you might ask, well, you know, could we do this? Is this a good idea? Is it something that would make a difference long term? So whether you're here in the audience or whether you're at home online, we'd love to be hearing from you. And I can see a hand up down in the back. And if for anybody that is, in a sense, would prefer not to say it out loud, I think there's a sheet on everybody's seat where you can write the question or a comment and leave it behind, that it can subsequently be evaluated. Shay has the box in the back to put them into if you write the questions on it. But I think the sheets are on the seats, Shay, if I'm not mistaken now. So depending on which way you want to do it, but this is Michael wanted this forum to be where ideas that maybe have not yet come into the assessment arena might still come, because a good idea, whether it's at the last minute or the first minute, is still a good idea. So we'd love to get as much interaction as possible. So before I go at the back, I think that's Tom, is it?
That's right. Thank you, Andy. In fairness to Teagasc, you have to be complimented on the evening you've put here, but I think the panel that you have there now will give everybody in this room a bit of confidence that the tillage industry is getting the respect that it deserves. So to Matt and his team, well done. Keep going, because we've been a long time asking for recognition of the importance of the tillage industry. But my question to Andy, you know, has your committee looked back a little bit and seen what we had in the tillage industry in years gone by? And I speak particularly of two crops. That's the beet and the milling wheat. You have mentioned milling wheat, but not beet. And there was a very concerted effort back a number of years ago to redo the tillage industry. But because, and in fairness to the men that did it, they were actually just a little bit before their time. If they had been there with that idea now, and with the mess that we see with the environment, that beet industry, given the fact now that we know it was shut down on very false pretenses, and we now have sugar after doubling in price across the world. But I think it will solve a huge amount of the problems that we have out there, but also give a very good base to the tillage industry going forward. So I would just ask, have you discussed the idea of getting the beet industry back in there? Because 7 years ago, our government said, no, milk quotas are going in 2 years. It'll be a bonanza for everybody. But unfortunately, it hasn't. So is the opportunity there now to revisit it? Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So the question ultimately is, has sugar beet come up under the auspices of the food vision?
Not as yet is the answer. But yours isn't the first comment that I've got to make sure that it is raised in the discussions. I think the beet is easier said than done. I mean, we sat in from a journal point of view on some of the discussions with the Food Crest people in North Dublin and Simon Cross and so on. And as you say, it went a long way. I don't know. You know, sugar is a yo-yo price. So unless you have the reintroduction of a common policy for sugar, I can't see it happening in Ireland. If there is, then of course you're into a different ballgame. But I really honestly have always felt that the sugar policy as we knew it, and Alan, I'm sure you'll disagree, the sugar policy as we knew it was a victory of politics over economics. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if we know where we are and we gain from it. But that was the actual result. As far as I know, at the present time, Europe cannot compete with cane sugar in a normal year. But then, of course, in a normal year, in a normal decade, the price fluctuates unbelievably. So either something comes from Brussels, and I've no problem in having the group discuss that and get some kind of consensus that the Irish government make a case to Brussels for the reintroduction of a proper common policy with an external tariff. But that's a whole new discussion. But I promise you the subject will come up anyway in the forum.
And the second crop that Tom mentioned was milling wheat. It's something that, you know, different of us have spoken about umpteen times in recent, but has there been any pressure internally from people to introduce a milling wheat industry?
It's certainly been discussed, and it would be, while there has been some resumption of niche mills and that sort of thing, I think it would be a tremendous benefit to the sector if some sort of native commercial flour milling, and perhaps not even just focusing on wheat. From the Grain Committee perspective, we would have thought the Brexit Adjustment Reserve funding was an absolutely perfect option for restarting a sector entirely affected by Brexit. And it did, because at least 90% of our flour now comes from the United Kingdom and that sort of thing. So it's disappointing from a government perspective that they haven't chosen to allocate some of that funding. But I suppose that it's not. I don't think we should probably need to keep the pressure on and keep moving. And it's certainly a sector that, and I think there's even research about to commence in UCD, a PhD, and there's other research programs looking at proteins from that. So it's all to be welcomed, and hopefully it can translate into.
Just before I let you, Bob, again, it's interesting from my point of view that when you look at a milling industry, traditionally we talk about wheat as the product that goes through it, and bread or breads as the major outcome from the flour for that market. But a lot of the research that's going on at the moment is looking at barley. But again, for the baking industry, for the bread industry, to bring certain characteristics of other cereals that have higher health characteristics into bread. So the activity of a mill might be a lot different in the future than the traditional model that we have on our own heads. And peas are also being looked at in terms of what the flour from those crops bring to certain baked products at the end of the day. Bobby, sorry.
Yeah, just to come in on that, I think we have to recognise the way the world diet has changed. We're going to the slice pan in that regard. But just to mention wheat in another context, the drinks industry, I think there's excellent work going on there where wheat potentially and more than likely could replace imported maize in the drinks industry. And I think a lot of work has been going on there, and in Teagasc, especially there in Oak Park, and in Carlow Setu College there. I think there could be a real opportunity for wheat when I mentioned the wheat crop specifically, but reintroduction of milling wheat is obviously, we're all eating more pizza breads, we're all eating more of those types of breads as well. Irish wheat would definitely faint the dots a lot. It might be for the peak or the real high grade wheat that we might be able to grow here, but there's definitely the diet has changed, and we can maybe latch on to more of those markets that's suited for the grain Irish wheat we grow here.
John, just when we're on that subject, John, would you mind just giving the audience a very quick summary of the work that has been going on using wheat for alcohol and distilling?
Yeah, we have a department-funded project, as Bobby said. It's ourselves and SETU in Carlow, and also TU Dublin, and it's been looking at. I mean, distilleries in Ireland have over the years tried wheat. They've got a batch in, they've tried it, it's not gone well, and they've said it doesn't work. So part of that project has been to look at the processing of the wheat, and they've said it doesn't go well. You don't get the alcohol yield. It's all, you end up with sticky residues, and it's all a big bloody mess. So Richie Hackett's been in that project looking at how do you grow wheat, you know, looking at different varieties, how fertilizer, and how do you optimize the quality of the wheat through the way you grow it for distilling. And then SETU have been looking at the processing. And through that exercise, Richie's found that if you can grow as big a yield as you can, then you get the best quality for alcohol, which is a bit of a result. You know, it's kind of the reverse of red wheat, when really you've got to try and keep the yield down to get the protein. And the work in SETU has shown that by modifying the distillation process in terms of temperatures and times and that sort of thing, that you can get alcohol yields per ton of wheat, which are as good as, or very close to as good as, maize. And I'm also told, we had Lisa Ryan join us last year, I think, or earlier this year. I think the beginning of this year, who previously ran the Royal Oak Distillery and prior to that worked in Waterford Distillery. And she tells me that the quality of the spirit that you get from Irish wheat is much better than you get from maize. It's a finer spirit, whatever that means. I don't know what it means, but you know, but she tells me it's a better quality spirit. So you get good quality, high yields. So there is an opportunity there to develop that market. And, you know, I'd like to see bottles of whiskey appearing on the shelf saying everything in this bottle came from Cork or Waterford or Carlow or Wexford. You know, the water came from there, the wheat came from there, the malt came from there. And as I say, then you can't put French maize in it and sell it at a premium to people who do know what a fine spirit is.
It's one of the things that's kind of been in the background very often, is to see if we can change the what do they call it, the technical file, which says that Irish whiskey only has to be matured in a barrel for 3 years. It doesn't matter what else goes into it. And that just seems wrong when you have the word Irish associated with the product that's being sold. At least it feels wrong to me and to most of us as well. A question at the back. Sorry, I've delayed it. I think on the left first, and then I'll slip back to the right.
A lot of talk today has been about the exportation of slurry onto tillage land. But if you're Index 4, you can't take that slurry. And there was nothing mentioned about perhaps ring fencing tillage land. Like back in 1993 when CAP came in first, you couldn't plough an acre of land unless it was eligible, unless it was previously in tillage, or you were going to put an acre back into grass to replace the other acre. That perhaps there is scope there to ring fence tillage land in a similar process in Germany a number of years ago when dairy land was under threat from land growing crops for digesters. They ring fenced the dairy land to preserve the dairy industry in Germany. So perhaps the reverse could be done here in this country to at least preserve the tillage land that's here, that's currently being eroded every year.
That's certainly a topic that has come up. But anybody want to comment on it? I don't know how easy it is to do it legally, but if
1993 with eligible land, you couldn't plough an acre of.
Okay, if you're using the mic, James.
Sorry, apologies. In 1993, we were able to put in eligible land that you couldn't plough an acre of grassland unless you were replacing it. Surely the reverse can be implemented today quite easily. And in Germany, only 3 years ago, they preserved the dairy industry that was under threat from crop production, believe it or not, for digesters. So there is precedent there.
Yes, and you know, from the little that I know, I can also say that not official, but the people in the department in Ireland are very definitely of a view that the European permanent pasture policy is designed to make sure that it's not taken away and eroded, because they have predominantly tillage and very little grass. In Ireland, the feeling is that we need that same law completely reversed. And that's partly what you're saying about ring fencing, and that's certainly a comment that a lot of people here, I would have said, have submitted to the forum as well. Does anybody want to comment on it before I go to the next question? Bobby?
I'll come in a little bit on it there. It is it's not as straightforward as it sounds, I suppose. It definitely needs more than a 2-minute discussion here today, if it's worth considering. There's no question about that. A lot of Irish tillage farms are mixed farms as well, so you'd have to take stuff like that into consideration. But I suppose where James's comment is coming from is the reality that the loss of tillage area in the last 20, 30, 40 years. One statistic that hit me in the face last night when I was reading the report that there was something like 23,000 tillage farms in the 1990s. I stand to be corrected on the exact decade. And now we're down to 4,500 specialist tillage farmers. And that leads on to the question, where are you going to get the next generation of young farmers? We have to cover that in the forum as well. We see it was mentioned earlier about IPM and implementing that and not having enough staff to even man that if it comes forward. So an area of where we're going to get the youth from, we haven't really addressed yet, and I'd like to see that happening in forum. And I have no simple answer to that, but I think I share James's frustration on the way land has been lost, and we all see the positives of why we should keep the tillage base here, but we have to see the actions as well. And do we have to take a drastic action? Like I call it a drastic action that James suggests. I don't know. It's more than a 2-minute conversation here.
Okay, there's a question on the right at the back, I think.
Yes, if this had been a dairy forum, the topic that we've discussed this evening would be the price of milk. We're here at Tillage Forum, and we're not talking about the price of grain. And the problem with the price of grain is actually very simple. There's a huge disconnect between our legislation and what the consumer wants. The consumer wants cheap food. Legislation doesn't allow us to avail of the technologies that can be used by the countries that we're importing our main animal feedstuffs from. And until we resolve that, we're at nothing. Like at the moment, grain prices are depressed, largely because of the fact that there's a huge corn harvest out there. And that's what's depressing our grain price. And as long as Europe allows us to buy in foodstuffs that we wouldn't be allowed to produce ourselves, we're at nothing. And until we solve that, we'll solve nothing.
That's comment more than question, but it's still very true. Anybody want to comment? John?
I agree entirely. You know, we're not on a level playing field when it comes to world markets, but I think you know, there certainly is recognition in Europe, and there's that consultation going on at the minute about whatever, you know, new genomic technologies or new breeding technologies. And, you know, you would hope, and I would hope people would respond to that in a positive way. But I think you might argue that GM is kind of history, and that, you know, these new genomic techniques, you know, will take over anyway, not just here, but abroad. And if we can get that, and we can particularly do work in Ireland, looking at traits that are particularly needed by Irish farmers. For example, septoria resistance in wheat, brinchosporium resistance, or ramularia resistance in barley, or whatever it might be. You know, the rest of the world's working on drought tolerance. Maybe we should be working on waterlogging tolerance. You know, but if we can use those techniques and develop varieties which are better suited to Irish farmers, then I think we can start to level that playing field. It's longer term, and I share the frustration that, you know, we're stuck in this thing that, you know, we're stuck with world prices, and, you know, there's a lot of things that we can't do that our competitors can do. But hopefully that won't persist for too much longer.
One of are there any other questions out there? Yeah, okay. Sorry, I'll go there before I say anything. Alan?
Thanks. Thank you very much. There were a number of points raised this afternoon, and if I may, I'll revert very quickly to each one of them. First of all, the issue of cheap food. I'll stand up if you don't mind. The amount of people's income that was spent on food 50 years ago was quite significantly high. I can't give you the figure off the top of my head, but now it's much, much lower. And arguably, one could make an international policy decision that food is too cheap. I think that is absolutely correct. And we could do with an uplift in prices, and we could do with a drop of subsidies. At the same time, please, not together. The other thing I want to say is that anaerobic digestion certainly needs to be looked at very, very carefully, because the potential there is huge. The third item I'd like to mention, and I say this with all humility, I farm a tiny amount in this country and rather more in Canada. And in Canada, I have direct experience of two things. One is bread and alcohol. Sorry, two of them are bread and alcohol made from local Canadian wheat. Sorry. And the alcohol that's made from the wheat is actually of excellent quality. It can be used for potable purposes, or it can be used as a biofuel. And there was a tendency that it's into two streams. There's a firm in the south of Saskatchewan at Unity called Northwest Terminal, and they have two streams. They take rubbish wheat and they make alcohol from that for fuel. And then take good wheat and they make potable alcohol. The other angle that I'm aware of in Canada is that they don't have many sugar factories. There's one in the south of Alberta owned by Rogers. And everybody in the catchment area absolutely loves their sugar factory, as they do in Ontario, as they do everywhere else on the face of the earth, except in Ireland. And what did we do here? We kicked them out in order to get compensation. We got compensitis, and it's a damn disgrace. And I respect everything you've said, Matt, but I would like to see our sugar back. It's almost 100 years ago that my father and some other engineers and chemists came to this country at the invitation of the late W.T. Cosgrave to set up the sugar industry. They did. It worked extremely well for 80 years. It paid for itself. It paid for a lot more besides. It goes up and down. There is nothing, ladies and gentlemen, in this world that's consistent and goes evenly. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Everything changes. Don't let's say that the price of sugar is high
Alan,
or low. Sorry, let me finish.
Yeah, no. What we're looking for is things that will take us forward.
I want to go
forward.
comments
in that.
We're going forward. Don't say that the sugar price is high or low, therefore we can or can't do it. The sugar price consistently is what it is, and you can join all the dots in the graph, and it does work. Everybody in this country consumes 31 kilograms of sugar per annum. That's 210,000 tons for the entire population of the 32 counties, which would sustain one sugar factory, which I want to see coming back preferably in the center of the country. Carla was the original point, and I think it's a very good point to reconsider. And currently, and I'm going to sit down then, Andy, you'll be delighted to hear, I'm actually putting together a paper for a particular university, I won't disclose it publicly, that want to re-look at putting sugar back where it should be, and our farming restored to having a good balance of rotation, because that crop is hugely missed. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Alan. The points in there are sugar. We've mentioned sugar, but alcohol. We mentioned alcohol from the point of view of whiskey. Alcohol from the point of view of a biofuel. Is that being considered? Or I think from listening to Gary earlier on, if we produce alcohol, any of the benefits go to a different element of accounting in terms of emissions, etc.
I think the difficulty with wheat going into alcohol, Andy, is that the Renewable Energy Directive regulations, or the new RED II regulations, mean that you have to make a certain amount of saving. For example, so the greenhouse gas cost of your renewable has to make a saving compared to, in that case, petrol, and it would be very hard. It's very hard to stack that up, particularly if you're using a lot of fertilizer to produce the crop, which is why we're considering, things like red clover silage for going into AD, because if you're using fertilizer to grow the crop, you're using a lot of energy, and you find the energy saving. And that was one of the problems with biodiesel from oilseed rape, that if you actually added up all of the greenhouse gas costs of producing the biodiesel, it was somewhere like 90 or 95% of the cost of just using diesel. So the saving wasn't big enough for it to stack up, and I think we would find that's where we'd struggle with bioethanol now. Okay,
I know, Dermot, you have a question coming in from Zoom.
Yes, yeah, it's a very specific one for the Vision Group, really. And it's this, could a payment of some sort be given to growers who plant first crop cereals? That is, after a proper break crop, not after grass. It will encourage good rotation and in turn benefit growers in the longer term. So specifically for first wheats after a cereal break crop.
Okay, that's
first wheats after a break crop.
After a genuine break, a root break or equivalent. As an idea?
Yeah, I mean, it's a valid idea. I suppose it's very specific and hasn't been discussed, but I suppose it's perhaps slightly tied into the new eco scheme options where 20% of the farm can be oilseed rape beans, so your payment is effectively loaded onto that crop, and then your corresponding first wheat following those. So perhaps is it some tweak of that? Yeah, but certainly promoting rotation and getting into these first cereals is essential, really, to driving up and increasing our native cereal area. Would be my comments on it.
Yeah, the question was cereal. It wasn't just a payment for the crop. It was a cereal, wasn't it, Dermot?
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
For first crop cereals. I think the notion was that it wouldn't be abused, if you like, by paying them for coming out of grass, where it might be used as a reseeding method. Yeah. So that's probably some of the notion.
And anybody else want to comment on it?
I mean, Andy, it's really a matter for someone from the department. I don't think any of us know what the rules and regulations are about what you can and what you can't support. Obviously, I don't think there's anyone here that wouldn't say having a good rotation, it's a bad thing to do. And I think there have been discussions, particularly about that tillage incentive measure, as to whether maybe it should be longer term, and that you have to, you get it if you go into tillage, then you have to stay in it for 3 years or 5 years. And I think there have been discussions in the group about that, as to whether that will fly or not. I guess none of us know yet. But it would be a similar thing. I mean, I'm guessing the question is trying to avoid a reseeding scheme. When you come out of grass, you go into a cereal, you underplant it, and then just go back into grass again.
Which is where the original one went. We can all agree. Bobby?
Yeah, I think the report does nail down on the tillage incentive scheme in its current guise. That is going to be revised or reviewed at the very least. Putting them straight back into grassland after 5 months, we yet have to wonder the merits of that. So I think the department and all those present have recognised that tillage incentive scheme needs to change. We need the funding, but obviously how the mechanics, how it works, needs to be revised seriously. And I think any full-time or tillage-only farmer would totally agree with that. As regards to payment, on the question, I'm not really sure how that would work, but for as far as I'm concerned, because of our credentials when it comes to greenhouse gases, I think some sort of a payment for low carbon producing farming should be considered. It's part of the climate action plan and as part of the EU Green Deal as well, that taxation measures or credits can be considered. And I think we need to be rewarded from government for low greenhouse gas emissions going forward. We're in a different era now. The public will demand it.
Anybody else? No. Ronan, sorry for holding you.
No, I was just wondering about, there's a big effort from Europe to produce protein in Europe, and especially here we've the protein scheme and that. But when you bring that a step further, I think we have six actives cleared for use on beans and peas in Ireland at the moment. And as far as I know, 4 of them are substitutes or candidates for substitution, which probably means that we will not have them in the future. So I suppose you're looking at 2 policies coming from Europe, one to increase protein and another to reduce chemical use, where we won't have the equipment to control weeds bar from a mechanical means. And I just wanted a few comments on the, as you said yourself earlier, lack of cohesion from European policies coming forward.
Anybody want to comment on that? Because it is...
Just if I could make a comment. I mean, clearly the oilseed rape thing is a mess in that for farmers infected with charlock, they're gone down the clear field, lower yields, very poor yields this year, and the capacity to reduce charlock in the ordinary varieties has been almost eliminated. So clearly the minister has a choice. Can he invoke the emergency rules that have been invoked by the nicotinoids in France and Britain? So that's clearly one option. But the other one, actually, in my view, is that there is now a lack of senior Irish personnel in any of the main directorates in Brussels, especially in agriculture, where we were very strongly represented, and there is now not a coherent Irish voice there. I don't think you can expect Mairead McGuinness to get down into the nitty-gritty of permitted herbicides at a full commission meeting. But if it doesn't come up through the ranks, and I would strongly suggest, and I think it would probably should be included in the report, is that the Department of Agriculture or the government itself institute some kind of special incentives or some kind of scheme to train future bureaucrats to take part in Brussels. It's all gone towards Eastern Europe, in my view, and all gone excessively green without any scientific base, as we've seen in a lot of the regulations. So I completely agree with you, but I think the fundamental remedy is to look at the personnel that are in charge of drafting and coming up with the initial proposals and influence at that stage. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's effective to expect the national delegations to raise flags later on in the process. You may get some change, but nothing beats, in my view, having senior bureaucrats there within the Commission influencing the legislation based on their own experience.
Ollie, up the front. It's coming, Ollie.
Yes, Andy, just going back to Gary's presentation there, where he had all the emissions and carbon footprint of all the different sectors in agriculture. And the black line across the bottom was startling when we seen that. So we have this product here in Ireland, right, that fits everything in the climate action plan. It's an advertisement's dream to promote a product like this. Yet we cannot get one agency in this country to promote Irish grain, right? We need to get some way, and the Vision Group need to think serious about this, some way to get this to the consumer. The consumer, we were always told we had to produce what the consumer wants. We look at a consumer in this country would be forgiven for thinking that cows only ate grass, right? And Board B chairman 2 or 3 years ago told me they won't mention Irish grain in the thing because they'll have to tell the consumer what the rest of the feed was. Now the rest of the concentrate feed is up to maybe 70% coming from third countries, no standard whatsoever. So if that was showed in a supermarket and put on a label, what would the consumer pick? He'd pick the Irish product because he knows, well, we're going through the treadmill of rules and regulations that come from Brussels. It's verified by that. But still, our Department of Agriculture will not recognise, even though they impose all these rules through Europe. And Board B, who promised the consumer, if you look at the charter, they'll tell you, it says, full and accurate traceability with all food produced on the origin, carrying the origin green label. 70% of the concentrate comes from third countries, and all the environmental baggage they have, rainforest destruction, chemicals that have been banned. We heard a man from the EU here a few minutes ago earlier on talking about the MRL levels on the stuff that was imported. MRL levels do not apply, and everyone knows that, to a banned chemical, right? So that's what we're up again. Vision Group needs to put Irish grain first and central. Irish grain shouldn't be seen as to solve the derogation problem for the dairy industry, right? Put us first. The department needs to do it, board needs it, and this Vision Group needs to put Irish grain first and central. Thank you very much, Annie.
You could have stolen my thunder there, Ali. Because the one question that I have, and it relates specifically to that, is, you know, one of the recommendations in the report is that Board B should begin to align with Origin. Board B should begin to align with Teagasc to fit in with Origin Green, and that way we can know it's Irish because they will have done a recce. The question is, do Irish farmers want to be associated with having to go down through? It's not the question, but it's part of the same answer. Do we want to? Because I think we're going to continue to hit a brick wall if we don't have a mechanism of alignment that somebody can put that whole traceability thing there for us. And I would wonder offhand, personally, if that is much better done using a range of sustainability criteria associated with Irish grain, which we think we can measure up to, rather than just the word Irish, because if you use the word Irish, we can be in trouble with EU equivalents. Bobby, Max, what's your opinion on those comments?
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, we certainly need to get those sort of carbon footprint. I think that's essential, and we look forward to the AgNav programme and getting a big pool of village farms and producing a variety of crop and actually see what the results are, because I don't think we know. Some may have measured using the other various carbon footprint calculators. I think we have to get one that's designed by Irish scientists in Teagasc and that sort of thing, or using Irish scientific benchmarks to measure that before, and then I think from there we can really drill into the claims that we can make, and then I think we can go forward and look for sustainability criteria. But I do agree with Jolly, we need to put it centre, and we produce a lot of feed grain, and it's so important that is put front and centre, and we have to start with a variety of measures to make sure that is front and centre, But definitely, and in terms of payments, I think we have to verify, and we actually have to have information behind that before we can make the claim. So.
If all of the industry is running under a banner of sustainability, surely based on all the things we hear and the types of graphs that Ollie refers to there, surely we should be able relatively soon to have a set of figures that will verify, not just a claim, verify the fact that we have a sustainable product. And if we do have a very sustainable product that we can prove, we don't have enough of it because we only have X amount of Irish. And if sustainability in the feed chain is to become part of what the future requirement of the industry is, well, then we should be able to measure up to and have a product that is first in demand rather than a residual requirement. And we'll have some rations that are 100% Irish, who could really help the requirements of individuals in the livestock sector. That would be my vision of where the whole thing would go. But we're sometimes using different words in the description of the problem, but it basically amounts to the same thing. Generating that real demand for Irish above imported. There will still be imported, but the people who have to opt for the imported may not have the same sustainability statistics that can justify their needs if they haven't got their claim in for Irish first. And they could be in trouble with their end market at the end of the day if they haven't been able to join the dots. It's not something that we kind of go with very willy-nilly. Sorry, go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, we mentioned Orby and Origin Green. I'm a tillage only farmer, and I can't be part of the Origin Green story currently because I'm a tillage only farmer. So that's maybe one of the first steps that could be addressed. I mentioned earlier about promoting what we have. The job of our Morbia is to promote. I've done an excellent job for other products. Going back to your point, Daddy, as well on it, we need our grain going to the livestock farmer. He's the benefit from using our grain with his customer, who's either the meat processor or the dairy processor, and they have to be rewarded by their customer for using native. And that's where we need to be going. We have to create demand for Irish grain. I will ask one question that can't be really answered, I suppose, but will promoting ourselves as native Irish grain, will it actually add value? And that's the trick, and that's where the trick really comes in. We have to use it as a tool to promote ourselves, but we have to actually make it work as well financially, make sure it pays in our pocket as well. Fair play to Ollie there, he's a huge advocate of our native Irish grain, and I think work is being made with the likes of AgNav, as mentioned there. I'm interested in where that will go. I'm very keen on hearing the life cycle of native grains. I think it's due very soon, John, or that will play a key role.
I was just going to say that, I mean, I think we now have the first draft of an LCA, which has all of the emissions factors in that mainly Gary has measured over the years for tillage in Ireland, you know, so that we know what the emissions are when you apply a kilo of nitrogen to a tillage crop in Ireland rather than taking sort of global book figures. And we're just about to start testing that with data that we've collected. But for any of these things, and I think this is a point worth making, you have to have the model with the emissions factors, but you have to have what's called the activity data. So you have to have the records for the crops, you know, how you cultivated it, what fertilizer you used, when you put the fertilizer on. And that's where we're really going to struggle as a sector. You know, for a lot of the livestock sectors, you can get your information on your milk yields from the co-op, you can get data from ICBF, it's all collected. But a lot of the data that we're going to need as a sector is probably written in diaries. And getting stuff that's written in diaries into a calculator is no mean feat for however many thousand farmers. So I think one thing that we could really do as a sector is improve our record keeping and make sure that we have those records, that we know exactly how much fertilizer was done, that we know what machinery, not necessarily what machinery was used, but you know what cultivations were done, all of that type of thing. And I think there's a board outside, and this sounds like an advert, and I wasn't intending it to be an advert, but you know, in terms of software that will help us to do that. And it was mentioned earlier in terms of the signpost farm, you know, collecting that data. And I think if we can collect that data, it'll put us as a sector in a much stronger footing. We had a hell of a job collecting data to test the calculator that we've just developed. Weeks of work.
Thanks, John. Alan, 1 minute. I'm in my last minute, so just a quick one.
Actually, John, does this work?
It does.
John has actually stolen my thunder because he's more or less said almost all that I wanted to say. I'm reminded of Dr. Tony O'Reilly when he said in the context of 57 varieties that the greatest tangible that any firm or organization has is its intangible, its name. And I agree in the spirit of calling everything Irish in order to sell it if we can do it. But it's not that easy. It's a bit intractable, and I think John Spink put his finger on it. Also, we have Irish whiskey, which is easily identifiable. Dairy Gold butter, which is easily identified. But wait for it. We also have a product which is sold in Ballymun and all over the place, and Mrs. Murphy won't differentiate. It's called Shukra, and they're allowed, the Germans who bought that brand name are allowed by the wonderful people who control brand names in Brussels to sell a German product with an Irish name. I rest my case.
Okay, look at one last one, man behind. Thanks, Alan.
This is a question for Max, because he was in the grain business in Athy. Just wondering there, when Teagasc put an extra 12 cents onto the pint, how much of that did the farmer get? I'm just wondering about that. Maybe Bobby knows.
I've no idea. We'll chat after, Bill. Chat after.
Yeah, look, they're all valid comments. Any other very quick one before we go? Tom, just bring one right back to the back. We'll just get one from Tom before I close. A very quick one, Tom. Because we're way over, I know, but there's never been good at finishing.
Andy, now just a question that was asked earlier. Vast majority of tillage soils are high index 3s and 4s. There's no doubt about it, we are part of the solution with the dairy problem that's there with slurry. Is there a case to be made that we would get tillage farms in index 3 or 4, particularly in P, would get a derogation to take in organic fertilizers? And then the gates will open, because at the minute we're breaking the law in most cases taking in organic fertilizer.
Okay, with the Parpin people in the room, anybody want to have a go at that one? Head down. Okay, I can hear Barry somewhere.
I think it's something that can be brought to the group for discussion.
Okay.
I think it's something that can be brought to the group for discussion, Andy. We welcome all ideas. That's to be put forward. We're open to all ideas, and this is a great opportunity. To hear the ideas from the industry, and there's still a lot of discussion to take place. So it's good to have this session and the opportunity to feed all these ideas back into the group.
What you're saying is we're only getting good when we're in the overtime, Barry. PJ behind you, just one. PJ, you are going to close it.
Sorry, very simply, scientifically, most of our arable crops are grown on free draining soils. Phosphorus is not going to run from free draining soils into watercourses if we manage our soils properly. So there's really no reason why we shouldn't be allowed to put slurries out on Index 4 phosphorus soils. Now, I'd like to one quick comment then in relation to the arable area in the country. The major problem we have in this country is the structure of our farms, the size of our farms. Very easy for a guy that owns 500 or 600 acres of land to sustain low prices and variable prices. But if you take the Midlands, where most of my work is, my typical client owns 100 acres of land, and he leases or rents another 100 or 200 acres. And that's the land that we're losing and continue to lose. And we're losing that to dairy farmers. The removal of the reduction in the derogation is going to aggravate that issue. So I visualize a lot of my guys losing area the coming year. I have lost about 4 or 5 relatively young tillage farmers. Now, a relatively young tillage farmer nowadays is 40 to 50 years of age. And those guys have left the sector totally and have got work off farm because of the fact that they cannot maintain the rented land that they need for their viability. Thank you very much.
That is the challenge that the industry is facing head on. It's the challenge the industry is facing. The head-on part of it we'll judge with hindsight. I think that's going to bring us, folks. I know we're way over. Can I thank all of my panellists for being here in front of you, for their comments, etc., and for the cooperation, and also thank you, the audience, both here and online, for the questions you've sent in. And I just want to call on Michael Hennessy just to close the meeting for today.
Okay, thanks very much, Andy. And look, thanks very much to everyone for turning up on such a wonderful day. Maybe it was a good thing to get out of the heat, but I think it was awful warm in here anyway, despite the aircon being on. So, look, I think it's been a really good discussion. There's some really good ideas coming in there. There is a sheet on your chairs there. If you have a think about it, look, we are in Teagasc, whether it's your own advisor or me in Oak Park or anybody you know in Teagasc. If you want to fill out some ideas that you have that might be able to inform some of the discussion the Tillage Vision Group is having, please send it back to us. The time is kind of short enough, but I think that's really well worth doing. So look, with that, I just want to thank a few people. I want to thank Declan and Rachel for basically setting up the visuals and getting that out onto Zoom. Dermot for looking through Zoom and doing the whole question scenario on that end of it. For the people on Zoom who are probably on tractors and various bits and pieces, in fairness, most of them stuck with us, I think, through the entire session. We've the sound team down there as well. There's a huge amount of interactions to get a forum like this up and running, so thank to all of that. Thank the panel here for their time, giving up their time, Andy, and all of the other chairs as well. So look, with that, huge thanks to yourselves for coming in. There's a much bigger crowd than really we thought we were going to have today, given the weather that's in it. I should be offering you a cold beer on the way out, but unfortunately all we have is coffee and tea. We can't actually give you beer, but anyway, coffee and tea the way out. If you want to have a chat to some of the panellists here, I think it's a really good thing to do. Chat to them. If you have something already written in that A4 sheet in terms of your ideas, there's a box just at the back of the room that Shay is holding up down there. Stick it into that. If not, write it down, take a picture later on, send it to one of us, or give it to your local advisor and feed it back into the system. So with that, safe home, and thank you very much.